want to welcome Yossi Cohen, former director of the Mossad and former head of the National Security Council in Israel, and currently the head of SoftBank in Israel. Welcome, Yossi.
Good morning, sir. Thank you.
We're approaching November 29th, presumed date of resumed talks between the superpowers and Iran on maybe a new nuclear agreement. Is there still anything to talk about with the Iranians, or are they already breaking out away from any supervision, safeguards, straight to the bomb?
Well, the current situation actually is absolutely complicated, since there is an agreement that the Iranians do not respect, and there are some achievements that have to be achieved in the negotiations if to be resumed by the powers and Iran.
Like what?
The Iranians today are enriching because they can enrich. Both bunkers that are holding advanced centrifuges of a more advanced type that had been in the past are rotating and enriching uranium to the level that the Iranians decide. This is something, in my opinion, that has to be absolutely seized and stopped. And I think when we discuss the cycle of the nuclear fissile materials, this is something that has to be eventually rearranged, or
broken apart.
Broken apart from the entire agreement, because I believe that broken apart completely, I mean, to destroy the facilities is something that has to be done by this agreement completely. Because of what? Iran today enriches because it can and because of its own decision. If the agreement would have taken all its capabilities and not their willingness, they are willing to have a nuclear bomb. Let's say they hadn't. That's a different story. But let's assume they are willing to have a nuclear bomb. Since they have the capabilities to enrich, and since they're holding the entire fissile materials cycle, as we call it, they can decide themselves when and for how long or how much.
But isn't it too late, as former Prime Minister Barak suggested, that it's already too late and that we have to learn to live with the possibility of an Iranian nuclear bomb in the near future?
No, I think it's never late. Actually, first, we have to all the time put statement in front of our eyes. One is that Israel will never let the Iranians to hold a military nuclear capability. This is something that we have to adapt ourselves in our new lives all the time.
Can Israel go it alone without superpower cover, without American support?
I think that Israel should have the ability to fight this aspect alone, like we did twice in the past. I mean, when Iraqis have decided to go onto the nuclear military path, we have attacked it. When the Syrians did the same with the help of North Korea, we did the same.
But in a much less sophisticated program with one major facility rather than bunkers and thousands of...
I assume that it's going to be complicated militarily, operationally, but I don't think that it is impossible. I think that if the State of Israel will decide to get, if I may, rid of this program that the Iranians do not really need for them protection, we can do it, and we will have to do it.
And but you know, several of your predecessors and the head of Mossad, like Ephraim Halevi and Tamir Pardo, and I would assume that the late Meir Dagan would have agreed, criticized Netanyahu's decision to convince Trump to let go, to leave the nuclear agreement 3 years ago, and they argued that, and they're not alone, argued that this was a major blunder for Israeli strategy.
I don't think that all the names mentioned would have agreed with one political or diplomatic structure towards Iran. I mean, Israeli system is different. I mean, we're very colored, if I may, I mean, in our versions of holding this diplomatic asset. My opinion is, and it was my opinion when I was Deputy Director of the Mossad, when I was, as mentioned, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, and of course Director of the Mossad, that we as Israelis should do our utmost to get rid of their capabilities within negotiations. This would be the best, of course, if Iran would come clean.
Yeah, but Israel persuaded the United States leave the agreement, to let the Iranians go on their own.
We had shown the Americans, and I believe the world within the American society, that Iran lied all the way to the deal. It lied because it was not coming clean with many issues and subjects that were hidden from the world and from us too. That was, by the way, the main target of the so-called the archive, the nuclear archive operation. We had to bring materials from within the military group, from within the group of Muslim
but you brought materials
to prove that Iran is holding better and better capabilities than we knew.
But even if you won the PR case, still they're enriching uranium more than they did when the agreement was still there. So you have a major operational success.
This is true. But I was honored, really honored, to be one of the prime negotiators by the State of Israel with the P5+1 when President Obama was the president and my counterparts were negotiating. Susan Rice as National Security Advisor, Wendy Sherman, Undersecretary of John Kerry, etc. And we were explaining then, not only to the American allies and colleagues of ours, but to the world entirely, to the P5+1 and the IAEA in Vienna as well, that a good agreement is possible. That a good agreement means close up to a complete shutdown. These two bunkers that you've mentioned, Aluf, this is absolutely right. There is a major question here. Why does Iran enrich? Why do they need enrichment capabilities and capacities? They do not.
So you had a PR success, and and many other operations attributed in the foreign media to Israel or to Mossad or to other names and euphemisms of Israel,
right,
to destroy this facility, that centrifuge, to kill that scientist or engineer or whatever. But still, they're enriching more uranium. So you may have operational success and strategic collapse.
This is such a good question because
strategic failure.
If you ask yourself, why is it that Iran can enrich? Because of a decision. They can enrich uranium as they want due to their own decision.
Yeah, but they're not deterred by. But they're not deterred. If you kill one scientist, the others are still coming to work.
If they haven't had their capability to enrich, this would not be the case. My request was, and still today, resuming the talks within, let's say, a few days, is that these two bunkers and the enrichment capability will be dismissed completely. Then there is not a discussion between us and the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians and the 3Es and the IAEA in Vienna about what's going to be the future of Iran on that sense, because the major problem of this agreement is that it has limit in time.
And that it lives infrastructure in there.
It is infrastructures, not only that. Scientists and their science capabilities is growing. Facilities have been improved, both. Natanz and Fordo is not Natanz and Fordo of 2015. And that was allowed.
Well, this is my argument, that with covert action, you cannot just, you can damage it, but you cannot destroy it altogether.
You can damage.
You can kill one scientist, 10 scientists, not 1,000.
I agree with you, totally. You can damage, you can slow down their capabilities. Every single thing that we had been, according to foreign reports, doing in Iran is to make sure that they keep enough distance of capabilities, not of willingness, from the bomb. That was it. And then, if we did what we did, and let's say that was in our asset strategic item to do or to keep this distance as it is, I think that we've done it correctly. Up to date, Iran is not closer to the bomb than it was in the past. It is not closer than it was before the agreement. It is not closer because they violate the agreement. This is not the case. It is true that there is all the time a kind of a need on the Iranian strategy understanding to go into more sophisticated facilities, capabilities, and advanced centrifuges so they can enrich uranium better. I think that the world should ask itself one major question. Why is Iran enriching? They do not need any enriched uranium, rather to use it in a nuclear weapon. And this is something that the State of Israel, National Security Advisor then, not too late to go
that the current government,
the Mossad, I opposed that dramatically.
And you think that the current government in Israel is following the same strategy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as far as I know, I believe that the State of Israel of to date, the Prime Minister, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of today.
He was one of your subordinates.
He was one of my subordinates, Dr. Eyal Khulata. They're absolutely updated of the Iranian deeds. And I think that they would run the same strategy as before, saying one thing: Iran could never acquire a nuclear weapon, and instead of Israel will do everything in its capabilities to make sure that it will not happen.
There was an argument that there was a lot of action, but not a real strategy of how to deal with if, in case the agreement fails and so on.
In case of the agreement
that during the Netanyahu government, you were, there was some inner circle of people.
Just a little reminder, I think it is important, Aluf, it was a very long process. I mean, Obama's administration's engagement with Iran was longer than the last term. It was longer than 4 years. Then we got part of the negotiations. We're trying to make our best influence as in between friends, as in between always America and Israel. Not conflicting each other, but maybe seeing things differently from different views.
And crystal ball, are they going to reach an agreement, a new agreement with Iran?
I'm not sure if today's possibilities to reach an agreement, because in Iran there were some changes too. Ibrahim Raisi is not the nice face of Iran as Rouhani was. He is much more extreme in his regional views than his predecessor, and I'm not sure that Iran will agree to run the same.
So crystal ball, you see motion without movement.
I see motion with a lot of emotion, but
then again, it falls back to the Israeli decision makers to find a way to deal with it without counting on the superpowers to do the job.
The best thing would be that if Israel and America, which is eventually the absolute best friend of the State of Israel ever, will decide together, as President Biden has recently declared. And I was honored to see Mr. Biden myself on my last month of my term as the director of the Mossad. And it was agreed, not only with me, but with the Prime Minister of Israel afterwards as well, that Iran, to both of us, will never be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. This is too dangerous for the region, too dangerous for the State of Israel entirely.
Do you have aspirations, as rumored, to be the next Prime Minister?
I mean, I'm not in politics today. Yeah. I'm absolutely in business. I invest most of my time to translate Zionism into these economical assets that are super important for the prosperity of the State of Israel. And this is what I do.
You think about politics?
Not now.
Not now. And there was an issue of present you got from a billionaire.
This interview. I think that we discussed national security, not my private life, but.
But did you find a way to give it back, as you said?
Yes.
Yes, it's over.
I hope it's over. I hope.
And last but not least, the issue of NSO, a company that sells cyber offensive products, and now declared by the United States to be harmful to American interests. And at the time, it was a lot of talk about how it helped Israel reach out to more peaceful relations around the world. Do you see the conflict here? Do you think the Americans are wrong in this?
I think that this story is absolutely sensitive. I know that officially this story has been dealt in the right offices, and I don't have the obligation nor the freedom to discuss this issue, with your permission.
I see. Well, thank you, Yossi Cohen, for joining us, and for a very interesting, though less than optimistic discussion about Iran and its program.
Thank you very much for having me this morning. Thank you very much, Aluf.
Thank you.